The United States President Donald Trump has declined to say whether or not he would use force to seize Greenland. The European Commission says every possible avenue is being explored to avoid an escalation in the row with the United States over its intention to take over the Arctic island. EU leaders will meet on Thursday evening for an emergency summit to discuss President Donald Trump's threat of tariffs on 8 European countries.
The calm of another sunrise over Greenland belies the global turmoil this place now finds itself at the centre of. The US president's threat of tariffs against anyone who blocks him taking control of the country has sent shockwaves through European capitals as they contemplate how to respond to a US leader with whom they are increasingly at odds.
Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure.
Among EU finance ministers meeting in Brussels, the talk was of what pressure could be put on the US to reverse its decision. Germany and France shoulder to shoulder in their response to what they called blackmail and threats.
We're living through uncharted territories. We've never seen this before. An ally, a friend of 250 years, is considering using tariffs. Europe has to step up. Europe has to be strong, and Europe has to make sure that the threats that have been imposed don't become reality.
EU leaders will discuss how to go about that at an emergency summit in Brussels on Thursday.
Should the threatened tariffs be imposed, the European Union has tools at its disposal and is prepared to respond, because we will do everything necessary to protect EU economic interests.
Among Brussels' options are retaliatory tariffs on US goods, or what's known as the anti-coercion instrument, which could limit US access to public tenders, investments or banking activity. The US president appears adamant, though, refusing to say if he would seize Greenland by force, and telling Norway's Prime Minister he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace because he has not been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Comments senior White House officials dismissed at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
I don't know anything about the president's letter to Norway, and I think it's a complete canard that the president will be doing this because of the Nobel Prize. The president is looking at Greenland as a strategic asset for the United States. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to anyone else.
Mr. Besant called any EU retaliation unwise. Mr. Trump will join him in Davos later this week. Fiona Mitchell, RTE News.
Well, stock markets in Europe fell today as investors reacted to the escalating trade tensions between the EU and the US. The Taoiseach Simon Harris said the EU should try to use a brief window that is open to resolve the issue of potential US tariffs, but cautioned that member states must be ready for all eventualities.
There were dark clouds over Dublin Port this afternoon. President Donald Trump's pursuit of Greenland threatens to unravel the EU-US trade agreement, which last year capped tariffs on products, including those from Ireland, at 15%. The Irish Exporters Association has called on the government to reconvene a trade forum made up of businesses and ministers.
Even though we're not directly targeted at the moment, if the EU-US trade deal that was done last July is cancelled, then who knows what Donald Trump will levy on the whole of the EU, including Ireland.
Across Europe, stock markets were down today as investors worried about the impact.
We do not want to see trade barriers, trade conflict like this. It doesn't help either side. It does not help the US economy, the EU economy or the Irish economy.
In Brussels, the Taoiseach stressed the need to find a negotiated solution.
It's very important now that we use the brief window available between now and the 1st of February to seek dialogue and to seek a way forward, but a way forward that will always see Europe stand with Greenland and stand with the Kingdom of Denmark, but also prepare for all eventualities.
Last year, President Trump threatened huge tariffs on Ireland's biggest export to the US, which is pharmaceuticals. But following a deal between drug companies and the White House, there are no tariffs on pharmaceutical goods sold to the US. So what Donald Trump threatens and what actually happens are two different things. But he's not to be dismissed either. David Murphy, RT News, Dublin.
Well, let's get more on this now from our Europe editor, Tony Connolly, who's in Davos this evening, and our Washington correspondent, Sean Whelan. Tony, to you first. The tariff threat is back, but the EU has been here before. Will it react differently this time around, do you think?
Well, Sharon, I think there is a grim and sober realisation at EU level that what you might call the strategic flattery by the European Union towards Donald Trump last year has been completely futile. Now, the instincts among EU leaders and member states are to avoid escalation in the hope that Donald Trump will back down, knowing that there is a threat there. Now, he threatened tariffs of 25% on any country doing business with Iran. He never followed through, but there obviously is a difference with Greenland. That seems to be a personal fixation of Donald Trump. The EU does have the anti-coercion instrument, which could really hit the US services sector, the digital, the film, the culture sector hard, as well as banking. They also have €93 billion in retaliatory tariffs, which they can take out of the drawer. That would hit things like soybeans, aircraft parts, clothing, whiskey, and so on, sensitive products from different parts of the United States. But all the emphasis now, I think, will come here to Davos, where Donald Trump, of course, is going to make an address on Wednesday. He's going to have a very big team with him. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, as we heard, is already here. Marco Rubio, we've got Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and other members of his cabinet. So that's really going to overshadow the meeting here. And whether or not EU leaders can actually get to him when they're here, get his ear and try and pull him back from his worst instincts, that's really what people will be looking for when he arrives here on Wednesday.
And Sean, tariffs, of course, are one thing, but when President Trump says in a letter to Norway that he no longer feels bound to think purely of peace, what are we to make of that?
Well, maybe it's the literal truth, Sharon. I mean, remember, in his first year in office, it's exactly 1 year tomorrow, he's launched airstrikes on Yemen, Iran, Somalia, Nigeria, Syria, Venezuela, threatened Iran, and is now talking about military action against Greenland. In an interview he did this morning with NBC News, asked if he would rule out using military force against Greenland to take Greenland, he said no comment. He also, in this very brief phone interview with an NBC journalist, said that he 100% will follow up and implement his tariff threat against the European Union. And he said the European Union should be concentrating on Ukraine and ending the war in Ukraine rather than trying to conflict with his views of US national security. Now, that letter about the Nobel Prize, that rather petulant response, was indeed a response to a contact initiated by the Danish and Finnish prime ministers, who were seeking a phone conversation with President Trump and suggesting that they should try and talk things down, de-escalate the situation, appeals for calm and a reasoned approach to dealing with this. In response, they got that letter from President Trump talking about the Nobel Prize. Again, in this interview that he did this morning with NBC, he was saying Norway deny it, but they are 100% behind who gets the award of the Nobel Prize. The Norwegian government said it's nothing to do with us. It's a committee appointed by our parliament who give the Nobel Prize. But clearly this is something that the president feels some way exercised about, and it may be colouring his thinking on what is being presented by Scott Bessent and others as a matter of vital strategic interest for the United States. Talk about missile defence against Russia primarily, but of course the European Union is also constructing its own Sky Shield missile defence system, and if missiles fly over Greenland from Russia, Europe is interested in shooting those down as well. So there's lots of common ground here, but right now we're seeing more conflict than consensus on how to deal with the issue of Greenland.
Sean Whelan in Washington and Tony Connolly in Davos. Thank you both.
Well, staying with those threatened tariffs from US President Donald Trump, and we're joined from the European Parliament in Strasbourg by the European Commissioner for Democracy, Justice, Rule of Law and Consumer Protection, Michael McGrath. And thanks indeed for joining us on the 6-1, Commissioner. One might conclude, following the actions of the US President in recent days, that the EU approach to Mr. Trump isn't working. He doesn't seem to take the EU seriously, and perhaps a stronger approach is needed. Would you agree?
Good evening, Tommy. Well, we're very anxious now to engage in diplomacy as a matter of urgency with the United States to de-escalate this serious situation. And there will be opportunities over the days ahead to do so. There will be opportunities to engage at the World Economic Forum in Davos. As you know, an extraordinary meeting of the European Council, the leaders has been called for Thursday of this week as well. And so we will be using every lever and every channel at our disposal over the days ahead to de-escalate, to seek to come up with workable solutions that avoid the imposition of tariffs, which ultimately will only serve to damage the respective economies in the United States and in the European
Commissioner,
Union.
And sorry to cut across you there, but you'll know that the French President and your Renew Group colleague, Emmanuel Macron, he has called for that retaliatory instrument, the so-called bazooka, to be used if these tariffs come into effect. I suppose he wants to display strength. Is he right?
Well, we're not at a point yet where any additional tariffs that have been announced by President Trump have come into effect. The first such date is the 1st of February. So we have almost 2 weeks and we need to use that time wisely and with a sense of urgency now to engage in meaningful discussions in full respect also of territorial integrity and sovereignty of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark, and ensure that we avoid the negative consequences that will be there for workers, for businesses and for consumers on both sides of the Atlantic if we do get into this spiral of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs.
Obviously, the EU will prepare for all scenarios. It's only 6 months since the EU and the US struck that deal in Scotland, a trade agreement which was agreed in good faith, I'd imagine you would say. And yes, the US President seems to be going back on his words. Is he a leader that the EU can trust?
And in our view, that deal, which was struck in the summer, should be implemented. It was the result of tough negotiations over a long period of time, compromises on both sides, but overall it provided a framework for stability and for predictability that businesses need in order to engage in trade and to take advantage of the opportunities of transatlantic trade. So we want to implement that agreement. We are at a serious juncture. We will be engaging now over the days ahead in every way we can with President Trump and the US administration, highlighting the damage that will be caused if we do get into a downward spiral of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs and all that goes with that, which will not bring anything positive for anyone in the US or indeed in the European Union.
Vice President has described the actions of Donald Trump as a textbook case of coercion. The German Vice Chancellor has described this as blackmail. With language like that, can the EU still consider the US an ally?
The EU has the tools to respond, and as you know, when we were in the middle of the negotiations that led ultimately to the agreement in the summer, we advanced various instruments, including retaliatory tariffs, which were then suspended. But I think we have to bring this back to first principles, Tommy. We know for a fact that if additional tariffs are imposed, it will impact on trade, it will impact on employment, it will impact on the health of the US economy and the European economy, and tariffs are paid ultimately by consumers. Somebody has to pick up the tab for any additional tariffs. So we're not at that point yet. We have almost 2 weeks now. We need to use that period of time efficiently and wisely, and the EU position is that we do not want to get into that downward spiral. We will seek to negotiate in good faith with our partners in the United States, but at the same time we will be ready for all eventualities.
Does the European Commission believe sorry to cut across you, but does the European Commission believe that a middle ground can be found here, where the sovereignty of Denmark and Greenland is protected and yes, Donald Trump is satisfied?
Well, the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Greenland must be respected in accordance with international law and in accordance with the UN Charter. If there are legitimate concerns in relation to the security of the Arctic region, our Danish counterparts within the European Union, the Greenlandic government, have made it very clear that they are open to discussions with the United States. They have not put any limit on the extent of cooperation that they are willing to facilitate in relation to enhancing the security of the region. And as you know, European countries have, even in recent weeks, stepped up their own operations and presence within the Arctic region as a demonstration of the need for all of us to work together. So we really should be on the one side when it comes to ensuring the security and defence architecture of the Arctic region, and it certainly shouldn't be the basis of any trade war between the US and the European Union.
All right, Commissioner Michael McGrath, thanks indeed for joining us on 6-1.
Thank you, Tommy.